important that we now bring in Anu into the conversation. Anu, as we look at diversity at a workplace, let's bring it down within corporates. Number one, what's the competitive advantage? And how have you experienced that competitive advantage in the workplaces that you've been associated with?
Thanks, Nishchay. I think, some of the data which has been discussed and, some of the very relevant thoughts that Mr. Malia, Dr. Malia talked about, I feel that has been applied in the workplace in the context more so of financial services. And I'll actually explain it through an experiential learning of myself. So as most of you are aware, financial services hasn't seen greatest of times in the recent past, more so outside India. And one of my most telling experiences was the time I spent in London, where I used to work for Corporate and Investment Bank. And we went through a really bad time, and if I look at the demographics of some of the profiles working in Corporate and Investment Bank, primarily white males 45 and above, and that is the demographics. Now, I'm not saying that may have any strong correlation to what happened with financial services, but that may have a strong correlation with some of the behaviors or the thought process or the risk-taking appetite which dwelled in a dealing room or in an investment banking type of environment.
Are you building a stereotype here for us?
No, I'm not.
White males,
I could go on.
White males, certain type of behavior over the age of 45.
Well, the point is, Nishchay, these cliques exist. They are realities of life. And where I was taking this to is the competitive advantage on diversity. So when I look at what bailed Citi out or Citi Wholesale Banking out was its diversity of network and diversity of talent. I've been in the thick and thin of this financial crisis in my time in New York or in London. And at a later stage, when we started getting a mix, not just of getting more women into the dealing room, but also different ethnicity, different nationalities, you realize there was a mix about the judgment which is being applied on commercial decision. So to me, that was a real competitive advantage, which not only helped us resurrect some of the decisions which were taken in the past, but continues to hold us good as we are yet transcending the journey through some of the crises of the past.
So you're saying, as I hear you, diversity presented a concrete competitive advantage for your business from a talent standpoint. And we'll get to what you defined as talent diversity, but you're saying that diversity definitely bailed you out, helped you rebuild the organization and strengthen it.
Yeah, it does. It did actually three things. One, it balanced the judgment in the way it was being applied. It balanced the way we were looking at some innovative solutions. And finally, it balanced the way we divested our portfolio.
Let me share an interesting data point with you. Individuals that are agreeable, that focus more on building relationships at the workplace, earn 20% less than those that don't. So I'm going to try and be as disagreeable as I can to ensure that my salary grows up coming April 1. Ashu, let me get you in. Diversity, competitive advantage. Is that a good branding strategy for an organization to be up here and say, yes, absolutely, diversity is the right thing to do and it helps my brand and it's politically correct? Or are there other flavors that one can add?
Okay. I have a different view on diversity. Actually, diversity starts with the mind. And more we speak about statistics and the rationality of it. Actually, the mind also has two parts. So the mind also is diverse. The brain is diverse. There's the left part of the brain and the right part of the brain. And more as we talk about the rational or the business case, we are actually using only one part of the brain. And actually, the entire conversation starts by not being diverse. So if you were to look at the emotive part or the right part of the brain and really look at the topic, and I think Adil brought in a very relevant scientific point in terms of where the discussion started. But I was in one of the forums a couple of weeks back and we were talking about governance. And actually the realization was that governance happened around 4 centuries back. And actually handling diversity, I think one of the companies which is very well known, as was present in India for 250 years, actually would have handled majority of the diversity. Can you guess which company was it? Yeah. So I think the story of diversity started then, but their way of dealing with it was more in terms of bringing in a conformance. That this is our way of doing it, please follow. So there are the clerk bands, there are the administrators, and they actually converted the diversity to conformance, and we know what happens after that. So to answer the point in terms of the business terms, I think there is no choice. And diversity, in fact, my experience, the way I see it is, I don't have much of an experience in terms of working with an international organization or an international posting, but today in the organization where we are, today we are operating in various geographies. For example, we are present in Vietnam, we are present in Middle East, we are present in North Africa, we are present in South Africa, and we realize that unless we don't deal with diversity of talent, be it in terms of nationality, be it in terms of certain qualifications, we would not have a business case for the long term. So if we really want to do something which is sustainable, it has to be diverse. And let me also tell you that within most of our discussions on diversity, on talent, happen either gender, nationalities or cultures. One of our challenges which we face is this entire piece of batch diversity. Batch diversity. So you have I represent an FMCG company, so you get talent which is a qualified talent, and you want to touch the diversity in terms of the batch, you have a reaction.
One more variable to make your life
One more
miserable.
variable to make your life. And our experience has been that when you deal with those conflicts, you have to deal with it, there is no choice. So diversity, is it a business case? I think diversity is the case, be it at business or be it outside business. So I think it is something all of us will have to deal with.
I want to change the gear of this whole discussion. We have been using this whole thing for the last two panel, and they were repeating and we were repeating what they are saying. I think all this is junk. The highest form of diversity is the diversity of thought. What do I do with an inclusion of women on my team if finally they end up saying yes to what I am saying? I certainly want them included in my team. What do I do with diversity of religions if I want only people who are saying yes from that particular religion to come and say yes to me? So the highest level of inclusion that we want to celebrate from a business perspective is the diversity of thought, which means our ability to take a differential view. Now, when you do a PhD, and I'm sure some people out there would have done, when you are proposing a hypothesis, you actually have to go through a diatribe, which means there will be 3 to 5 people who will be giving you counter theory to prove that what theory you are saying is wrong, so that you come out emerging from the diversity of thought and emerge with a much more positive theory.
So let's test that.
No, so one second. So therefore, the real advantage to business as a case study from diversity comes not from just having physiological diversity included, women included at a gender level, religious diversity included. The real diversity and advantage comes only when you have diversity and acceptance of differential thought and you celebrate that.
Okay, so let's test that. That's a noble thought, in fact, based on Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, where he spoke about individuals have different intelligences. And the simplest definition of diversity is, in fact, differences in human beings. Right? That's the simplest definition of diversity. Let me test this noble theory that Adil has put forth on multiple intelligences or diversity in thought. When we disagree with our bosses openly, while many bosses may stand up and say, please tell me when I'm wrong and check me, and you don't always have to agree with me. And visibly, you can see that the individual demeanor changes, voice, tone changes as there is opposition being put forth by one brave reportee who stands up and says, sir, I don't agree with you. This is my point of view. What do you think happens to that individual in that company?
He gets compensation increase. Your data is showing that.
In the West?
He gets compensation increase.
In the West, it works. In the West, there is still greater tolerance, even though this audience believed Indians have higher tolerance to diversity. My own proposition to this audience is that last when you disagreed with your boss, did you get a pat on your back and a higher salary increase, or did the individual tell you, next time, sonny boy, check what you say? And if you disagree with me, do it when nobody else is in the room.
Nishya, I just want to add to that. I think, you know, and this is a debate I often have with myself, and we can take it, you know, during Q&A as well, is how diverse is India? And I think India is a very diverse country with, you know, multiple languages, different religions, all of that. But how diverse are we relative to being a global citizen? And, you know, I've had to face multiple challenges when I look at hiring people from campuses. I find clones of each other on campuses. It's an often debate I have with the deans of the IIMs in terms of the profiles that are being hired on MBA campuses. And if you further go back into the education system and the way it works, we are really churning clones of each other. So, you know, we are very academically focused. You know, kids are taught to go into certain professions after they've completed school, and then they are led to certain corporates. So they are coming with we are actually dealing with a very homogeneous lot. It's only when they hit a workplace, which is more relevant for today's discussion, that we start having a debate about differences of thoughts. So to Nishya's point, deference or respecting adults is a value which, you know, in many cultures is respected, and children are taught about it. So challenging is not something which comes to them naturally. The other challenge which we, you know, coming back to the global relativity, is how accepting are we of, you know, people from different nationalities coming and working in India. I've had a lot of feedback from a lot of expats who work in India, and some of the acceptance challenges that they go through in the country. And it's not because of any malified intent, it's just a communication gap and the learning that we have to go through with each other.
Isn't the real challenge, therefore, and Adil, I think you've changed the gear, so let's get, you know, I love the thought of taking this very noble thought of multiple intelligences. Isn't the real challenge diversity in thought and uniformity in action? Because you can have, once there's an agreement through a process of discussion and deliberation, to then put the army behind that one action that has been agreed upon to ensure that you get the business results. While we might allow and for this discussion to take place, I think, isn't there a deficit in leadership itself, in the capability to then bring about an action that has the buy-in and support of everyone? Vinay.
Yeah. So, you know, I have a slightly different view. I think, one, if you step back, you see, diversity is a concept which is really, you know, more Western concept than Indian concept. It's got talked about a lot nowadays.
Why so?
Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Point I'm making is, India is a diverse country. So even if you agree on a measure that you want to roll out a process, let's say in an organization, the process gets rolled out in a Guwahati, in a Cochin, in a Punjab, in so many other places, being a pan-India organization. Now, in the process of execution, the uniqueness of every place will surface in the way they're interacting, the way they're assessing, the way they are talking, the way they're selecting. Let's say talent acquisition is a process. So many of the inherent diverse, you know, characteristics and traits will get actioned and will not get killed. That's what I think.
So, but my question wasn't about losing the uniqueness. I'm saying we may celebrate diversity in thought. Ultimately, when an action is determined, when you have to take an action,
right,
the leadership decides, this is what we are going to do.
So give an example.
The leadership decides we are going to grow our market share by 35%. There are people in the room that believe that is too aggressive a target. There are people that believe, yes, fantastic, that relates with my ambition. I'm an aggressive individual versus somebody who's more conservative. Is there enough alignment in action once we have allowed for that discussion to take place? Since we're talking about diversity in thought, there are people who disagree in a room. When they leave that room, have they put aside any personal differences that might have arisen because of that conversation? Was it focused on the issue, or did they make it personal and now they went out and said, this company does not have its strategy right, I do not agree, well, let's see what happens.
I think,
Ashu.
I think Adil highlighted that when he said that diversity starts with thought. And the use of diversity now, I think again, the other buzzword nowadays is innovation. So each organization, if it has to survive, has to innovate. Now, if you want innovation, then actually you need a lot of diversity to create that many thoughts, that many ideas, which you can evaluate. But having done that, if you do not converge, so you diverge and then you converge. If you don't converge, then it is something that is a fad, that is something good to have, but it does not make any tangible sense.
Isn't part 2 more difficult than part 1?
Part 2
so I allow for the divergence. I will allow for us to disagree. But finally to pull the
yes, very much. And I think that's the role of the leader. Because you're opening it by diversity.
That's the role of the leader, you know. Predominantly, what is the leadership about? So leadership is not about listening to multiple voices and getting confused.
Is there paucity of that in organizations?
That's the reality. Because we never use influencing skills. We always use power and we always use control mechanisms. The criticality of this is that the leader has to develop a hypothesis to his goal, to his achievement of where he wants to go. Diversity is helping him with multiplicity of alternatives, options to test whether that hypothesis which he is adopting to go to the goal has taken into consideration all the facets and aspects of the reality. And that is what the role of the diversity. He is therefore supposed to test this hypothesis in light of all of this to say, yes, I think if this strategy we adopt as a business, it seems to be right because it is adopting multiple diverse opinions, views and thoughts which are all testing my hypothesis.
So we've aligned diversity to a business priority. There is a rational need. Organizations would qualify them in different ways, and we'll get to how you've done it personally. We are acknowledging that diversity isn't limited to gender. There is race, there is ethnicity, there is social background, there is physical disabilities or abilities, special abilities. Clearly, what creates challenges in organizations is this very conversation.
In fact, let me give you an example. The first time I faced this situation when I came to SR, and a manager walked up to my room and said, "Sir, ye aadmi humko pagal bana raha hai." I said, "What do you mean?" He's saying he wants leave to go on honeymoon with his husband. How can he go on honeymoon with his husband?
With his husband?
With his husband. I said, "There's something wrong." You ask him then. Saying, "No, I asked him," and he said, "No, I'm going on a honeymoon with my husband." Now the question is that this is a diversity which even the law in India today stops. So when you are talking about diversity, read along with section 377 and you say, is that diversity tolerant? Well, it is not as compared to Western. So cultural implications are all right, but the thought level implication of diversity.
This probably has legal implications, but coming back to mainstream, it is because we build these single identifiers, woman, man, Kashmiri or Muslim, Hindu, gay, lesbian, straight. These are single identifiers. When you associate individuals with single identifiers, there is a greater possibility of conflict. It is divisive. This entire conversation on diversity is not inclusive because that woman is also probably a mother, is also interested in singing, is also a social activist. And as you increase the so-called identifiers related with an individual, you create greater acceptance. The conversation no longer is limited to whether or not we have been unfair to a woman. It is more centered and anchored around a business performance conversation rather than trying to alienate and create divisiveness and minorities and factions within organizations. We are having the wrong conversation. This is the wrong conversation because much of our education has been bipolar. We have been taught, the way our mind has been trained is it's either this or that. It is actually the meaningful integration of talent, uniqueness, the strengths and abilities of this individual as you integrate it into your talent management framework to be able to deliver business results. So acknowledging that this conversation cannot be limited by these single identifiers. Let me go to Ashu. Are these conflicts that one faces in organizations on a daily basis? What are some of the challenges that you have to face?
There are conflicts. And one of the conflicts right now, if I will look at my present context and look at it, is we are expanding in international geographies. And while we are expanding, the major set of leadership is Indian.
The
major set of leadership is Indian. It's an Indian leadership which has acquired businesses abroad. And when we would typically look at a consumer opportunity or we were to look at a market opportunity, the tendency is to always look India forward. So you would tend to have leaders who have been groomed in the Indian context who have to look at opportunities internationally. And the talent which is in those countries tends to look at it differently. So you actually have a conflict wherein the leadership is saying this is the way we would want to approach it because this is how it is done here, versus a local talent who says no, this is our context and this is how we want to do it. Now, the normal response which we would have is to put a process in place, have a rational solution to it, create a structure, create reporting mechanisms and deal with it. What we realize is to really, if you have to change it, you have to change the mindset. A mindset which you spoke of being inclusive, open to a different point of view, looking at it through their lenses, rather than always saying that we've done well, we are an organization who has gone there, so do it our way. And that kind of conflicts, they happen across. Many a time we tend to feel that these conflicts will happen actually on HR processes. They don't. They actually happen on business processes. They happen on certain business decisions. And our stereotypes or our certain paradigms, they hit you at the business level.
What was the last conflict any of you can recall, which had to do with either gender or religion or age? So the last one I experienced, brilliant youngster, does not conform to the tenure requirements of a promotion. Yes? That's one of age. He doesn't have the experience to become a manager. Why? He hasn't spent 6 years as an assistant manager. So, age. What are some of the conflicts in terms of discrimination?
The first time when I went to Coca-Cola and I came from a regimented American company like GE, and I sent out a note that I would like to meet my HR department at 9:15 in the morning. And all the so-called classical equivalent people of age profile said yes. Prompt came an 18-year-old who sent a message saying, sorry, I disagree with you. I will join the meeting and I'll be joining you over the internet. So, well, I may not be physically there at all.
How did you take that?
Well, you have to understand then the reason. You have to understand that there is a technology, there is a sociology that's changing. That's a classical old world perspective that you carried, which does not need to be carried forward to a new way of technology. The problem that we have is that we do not move along with time. And we carry the biases and stereotypes which were true in a given paradigm. And when the paradigm shifts and everything becomes zero, we don't retest every possible thing. So we continue the old programs. Currently it's happening. The world is going through VUCA times and everyone's talking about VUCA times and all of that stuff. Most of us believe that it's a tornado which is going to pass away. Just don't do anything. And after 6 months or 8 months, everything will become normal. Make all your investments at that time. How do we tell people that this is going to be the character of the new markets? Learn how to manage this change, which is also diversity from the continued experiences that you have had, to be able to succeed in the changing environment. So how do you retest every possible thing that we did in a new technology and a new sociology? That's the way to cope with it.
So this is a continuous struggle actually, and it's not only limited to brilliant youngsters.
No, I gave an example of a possible conflict. So as it related to age, it could be with women.
Yeah.
So somebody who went away on maternity leave for 6 months. Yeah, you please. She thinks she's better qualified to talk on women issues.
I'm clearly But you know, very often, coming back to gender diversity, which is a topic often debated in India, classic example, you know, I think we have some very budding young women talent in colleges. I think our graduation rates are becoming more healthy. Our hiring is becoming much better over the years in terms of percentage or women that are entering the workforce. But you know, the moment they get married, and more so, the moment they start a family life, there are unconscious biases which start to operate in workplace. That's a fact of life. We may choose not to acknowledge that openly. And very often, you know, it works for both men and women. Men are slightly less, you know, overt about it. But there are thought processes going in mind that if there's a woman going on maternity leave for 6 months, I'm not sure she's coming back, and maybe she's not. I don't know the real answer. But the planning starts to happen even before she's gone. So here is how the cycle works. She's going to go, so I may look for a replacement, a skilled replacement. This woman is left thinking, look, my boss is really not going to have me back, so I should start looking for another alternate role. And anyway, if I have to leave a 6-month-old behind, it must be worth my while. This is really not worth my while. And more than often, we find that a lot of women tend to take career breaks. And the percentage hasn't really significantly changed at the start of family life. I'm not judging what is right or wrong. I'm just sharing some of the dilemmas that we continue to face. And this operates. And why I say it's for both men and women, because the number of women who will come and have a chat with me about this topic are not being driven just because they have pressures in the workplace. It's also being driven by what their mothers have told them or what their mother-in-laws have told them. But these are real challenges. And yes, we are working on a lot of programs like second careers or getting women back, but it continues to remain a challenge.
Are prejudices now being built within organizations on not hiring women because of the sexual harassment policy law?
I don't think so. I think, look, from our experience recently, because you know the Vishakha case has been in the play for a while, but over the last 2 to 3 years, it's obviously got a lot more attention because of unfortunate events. I don't think hiring has got impacted, but there's some behavioral changes which have to be brought about in the workplace. You'll be surprised, Ms. Chair, the number of comments which would be passed, and people would just brush it off under the carpet. I think there's a sense of being a bit careful about it. Now, I don't think we should go to another extreme wherein, you know, if something doesn't work, it becomes a sexual harassment allegation, because that is going to then be, you know, not so constructive for the women workforce.
I've picked up a few comments, and I can test it with all of you. When candidates are being interviewed, and the candidate is a woman, and the interviewer is a male, many male interviewers have said, we'd prefer there'd be another interviewer who's actually a woman, such that there's no repercussion of the individual being rejected. That's one. I'm just sharing with you what I'm picking up in different organizations. Two, there is, given a choice between a man and a woman, and maybe that always did operate, for different reasons. One added reason is that I'd rather have a male on my team, given a choice. Equally competent, both equally competent. Now, where we're trying to build diversity, and maybe gender being one priority, has this added any extra tension in the workplace? And maybe people aren't voicing it because it's not politically correct. But
no, I'll voice it anyways.
No, not you. I'm saying the male. The male manager is not voicing it because it's not the right thing to say in any case. Is that there is a bias, preference being built?
I genuinely believe that protective strategies of corporates can only give very, very limited results. We heard about saying at least one candidate should be from a diverse gender to be brought on the interviewing table and all. I do not believe that the malaise, which is a societal malaise, will get over by giving protection. It is only when we systematically work with the entire ecosystem of talent management in the corporate and create an inclusive culture, that is the time the reality will come. When you are telling me that there is this person who's an interviewer and he's saying that I'm worried about interviewing a lady, very clearly tells me that the ecosystem of the enterprise has not been created to bring about a culture of inclusiveness, and the fierce conversation that the company needs to have with its management, who's sitting on the talent selection process, has not happened. Because how can he, in that environment, even have that fear? Which means that you may have all protections, you may have the sexual protection, you may have all kinds of norms, quotas, whatever, whatever. In the long run, when you want to really bring about a social change, look at it from a business point of view. If 50% of talent lies in the female gender, which you are saying, fine, if you divide the world into two parts of males and females, that's also a bias, but say, okay, let's redo that. Today, because of societal limitations, we have put all kinds of norms on women where we are not allowing them to participate actively in the workforce.
When you say we, who's the we?
The male gender. The male gender has, or the society through its male preoccupation of belief that they represent the strength and the talent, has put all kinds. Okay, so there are biological reasons why they do not activate. There are cultural reasons. There are various traditional beliefs that women don't activate and go into the workforce. Now, on the other hand, there is a corporate talent.
Hold on. Let me
complete my hypothesis. You are breaking my thoughts.
1 minute.
Okay.
1 minute. So, Anu, just to bring in the point, and I'm going to let you go again.
Sure.
So, Anu mentioned mother-in-laws, mothers, upbringing. So, the female section is also equally responsible for the current plight. You seem to have taken a view that the males are responsible for the plight in the society.
So the larger society is responsible for that, Malays.
Because again, you create a divisiveness again.
1 second.
Right.
So the question is, why do we make corporates believe that they are doing this major corporate social responsibility by virtue of employing them so that, you know, they are doing a great job to society? The challenge is a human resources challenge. Good damn it, it is your responsibility of every leader in a corporation to ensure that the quotient of the human capital is upped by the best available talent. You are fulfilling these positions by taking substandard men to fill these positions up, but are not willing to make change in your schedules, are not willing to make change in your programs to attract these women to join your workforce.
Great.
So there is no social responsibility act in it. It is a pure human capability and human quotient enhancement which an organization has to work on.
Okay, that seals part 2 of the conversation. We did aligning to business strategy. We've done acknowledging. We've heard from all the panelists that we've acknowledged that some of this conversation may be futile, may be pointless as we look at these single identifiers, take a comprehensive talent management outlook. You have a business to run at the end of the day. Select the best talent, is period. I mean, beyond that, whether man, woman, Asian, Hispanic, Latin American, Afro-American, all of that is really a secondary filter. And I think corporates do have a responsibility to society. So there are societal challenges from that standpoint. You have to behave responsibly such that you are in no way creating challenges for a section of society. So you're not being so-called excluding a certain section of society by your actions. Right? Inclusiveness is clearly a priority for the company.
I just want to add a very small point. I think these are very noble thoughts, but what tends to happen, there are unconscious biases at workplace.
Absolutely.
People are not even aware that actually they may be filtering out a candidate because of some of the strong held beliefs which you threw out at the audience. So it's a challenge for all of us to address. There is no quick solution to it. One of the things which has worked for us is just being aware about it.
So awareness, and I want to give you
and building the capability of the ecosystem.
One is being aware of the dilemma, the other is dealing with the dilemma. Many managers would say, well, I don't even know what the right thing to do is. If I did this, you would say, I'm being soft and chivalrous to women.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the other piece. And I'll tell you this very interesting story. I was in a game park in South Africa. And we were in this safari and in the Jeep. And we saw a Jeep that had broken down, another Jeep that had broken down, and the driver was a woman. So the male here, who's driving our Jeep, says, and I mentioned, shouldn't we be stopping and seeing if there's any help needed? And the individual said, well, I've actually tried it once, and was faced with a very curt response, as if she had taken offense because she was a woman driver, that a male had actually stopped to say, do you need help? Whereas this individual was just doing it as a colleague that may need help in changing, you know, any part or the tire. So this is a real dilemma. Remember, this is not only in corporates, this is in real life. Should you actually open the door? You know, when you're out with a colleague, should you open the door and let the woman colleague enter first? Or is that in a way seen as, no, that's not how I want to be treated? So somewhere this confusion exists with every single individual. There is no clarity, and if there is no clarity, behaviors are going to be, aren't going to be predictable, right? And therefore this happens in the workplace all the time. These are dilemmas that need a resolution, and there isn't any simple way of dealing with it. These are complex human relation problems more than anything else as we analyze these. Let's get into actioning, the last 10 minutes. So we did aligning, we've done acknowledging, now we'll do actioning. One diversity initiative that has been an absolute success in your organization or in your experience has been an absolute success, past or present organization.
So let me talk about Coca-Cola. We at a point of time recruited 45 women from different management schools.
So was it limited to gender here?
This was very specifically limited to gender.
Okay.
Because we wanted to correct the imbalance. And one way of doing it is to provide initial protection. And once you protect them and get in, then try to build the ecosystem. Because unless and until you get them into a certain number basis, then you cannot build the ecosystem in absence of that. And we did systematic mentoring of these women from men, women, and professionals outside this system. And today I'm very, very glad that 4 of these women are practically at the level 2 from the top management in these companies, having joined at the bottom of the pyramid.
Now, when you went out and said we are going to hire women,
sure,
isn't that a prejudice against the men who are equally deserving in that campus?
Sure it is. Who's saying no? Sure it is. But when you want to correct the imbalance by mouthing wonderful words and saying, we believe in equality, but we will bring only the men in. We believe in equality, but we don't know how to interview a woman candidate.
That means you were saying there's a negative prejudice existing against the women before you corrected this.
To a certain point of time and a period of time, you will have to provide this kind of protective programs. But just doing protective programs without building the ecosystem and building the capability to have tolerance to all kinds of diversity, it will not work in the long run. Then it's like the same thing that the Constitution of India has got, so that you will have to keep providing protection for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe hundreds of years maybe after independence also, because you're not doing anything to build the capability.
So let's take an example of an organization that doesn't have sophisticated talent management programs. Let's just assume, play along. And here
should be your customer.
My customer?
As a KPMG customer.
Yeah, obviously then we'll do business with them. But having said that, here's an organization that believes there is a competitive advantage in being diverse, at least saying so. We don't say it, obviously the message isn't out there for talent that believes this is a good place to be at. Do you think in such an environment where talent management is not sophisticated and you've got this diversity as and let's say only gender diversity as a target, X percentage of your population should be women. In this environment, will it work more as a protection program till you don't build a healthy talent management system? And will it continue to be so?
I am wondering what is the compulsion of an organization which does not understand talent management, is not doing anything very concretely to structurally manage its talent on the one hand, versus on the other hand also has this larger value of trying to bring in a diversity quotient. So I really do not know what are these compelling factors.
They won't be with the Joneses then.
No,
everybody else is saying and practicing this.
I think the quota system is actually counterproductive.
It is. But are people practicing it?
Well, they do. I mean, it does exist in different places, and I think it's counterproductive because positive discrimination towards women, and I'm not disagreeing with Adil, because when there's a startup situation and you're trying to go with a big bang, you might want to do it. But especially at mid-level or senior level, where the roles are more senior, critical, strategic, merit rules. So if you do a positive discrimination, wherein, you know, a woman who's probably less talented gets hired because of her gender, you never have the buy-in of the stakeholders, and that comes back to bite into success. But having said that, there's a very famous Harvard case study, which I don't know whether, I'm sure you've read it at some point of time, where they basically tested a hotshot trader, and they traded the case study with two different names. One was with a man and one was with a woman. Same trades, equally qualified. General perception of the man was more positive with the aggressive traits and all of that, whereas woman was more negative. So my only point is that if you have two people who are equally qualified, then you're in a position to make a choice if you want to improve something. But I would not go overboard on, you know, compromising on the quality of talent.
Both being equal in capability, given that diversity is an agenda item.
That's right.
In that case, you should exercise the choice.
Yeah.
Ashu, example, and then Vinay, any example you can recall.
Before I get into an example, I think what led us to take that action, I'll just give the context, is first of all, there is a clear realization that as an employer, we don't have a choice. Actually, the choice is now resting with the employees. If you don't have an environment which respects me, I don't want to join you. And that is something I think all of us will sense while we are hiring today. So that is very clear. The second piece is that compliance doesn't work. So if you're going to create quotas or you're going to make it mandatory, because the same talent, which is a well-respected, achievement-oriented, hungry for growth talent, they don't want to be accommodated. They want to have membership because of their value, because of them being contributors. They don't want a free ride. So that is the second. So how do you deal with it is you have to deal with it by building commitment.
Building capability.
Commitment.
Commitment.
Commitment, because that's again at the belief level. And then see, building skills, creating programs, according to me, are simpler because they can be mandated. But actually creating a case where the leader recognizes that for him or her to continue to be a good leader, you have to be open to diversity. And it is not only gender, it is also in terms of the talent mix. So I believe that this role can only be done by an MBA. It's again a stereotype. Versus being open to try out a non-MBA. How do you do that? So how do you build a case in terms of telling the leaders, how do you nurture talent? I think Anu brought in a beautiful point of the gender piece where a woman employees, when we recruit them on board, and actually after they are in their life stage, completing around 6 or 8 years, and when they go on a maternity break, and if you do not create a social environment which gets them back, actually is a huge talent drain to the organization. And we realized it not only as a gender diversity case, but also as a talent case. Why? Because these are people whom you have invested 6 to 8 years of inputs, trainings, experiences and all. And if you lose out, it is a tough attrition. So how do you create a social process around that and not create a policy?
Let me throw out another stereotype, just in the interest of our closure. Is the recruitment function, in terms of capability, the weakest arm of an organization in general? Is it the weakest? That means your superstars, from an HR standpoint, don't go to the recruitment function. They'll go to OD and PMS and performance management system, just to be clear. Is that a generalization, a stereotype?
Clearly. I don't think.
So you're saying it's not true?
I don't think it's true. I think recruitment is not a job of just the recruitment function. It's a collective job wherein, you know, the stakeholders.
No. Now you've very smartly turned the question on its head.
Right.
My question was the HR person in the recruitment function in comparison to the HR people in OD and leadership development and performance management. Hand on heart.
No, I can't say that because I have my team here. So.
So is it a generalization? And if it is true and there is some merit in it, the spotting and identification of talent.
Talent acquisition is not an HR job.
Is not an HR job.
Talent acquisition is a procurement job. It's more akin to procurement than talent management. And therefore,
HR people shouldn't be in talent acquisition.
Only specialized people who understand see, half the time the HR people are HR qualified. They are not business qualified.
Right.
They don't understand the technology at times, unless of course there are organizational systems which has developed them and things like that. They don't understand the engineering elements to it. They don't understand the chemical engineering to it. They don't understand the consumers at all. They don't understand insights, etc., etc. they understand HR. So they are like a chemist shop who has got all the medicines which are related to HR, and they try to treat every possible candidate from that perspective. So they will test out the leadership. Who gets selected? Smartly dressed person.
Who are the people that can identify?
Smartly dressed person like you who speak good English with fluent communication skills.
Who are they? And just to be clear, I don't have an HR background, but nevertheless.
But you get selected.
Nevertheless.
You would get selected by a not so competent HR manager.
No, I'm asking you a question. Specifically, who are the people that are able to spot and identify diversity in thought? Where are we building that capability within an organization?
So which is where I'm saying that we are not building, and which is why it continues to be an environment where you will have to keep providing protection, because you are not building that capability in your leaders and the critical people like the talent acquisition guys.
Vinay, you get the last word.
Thanks for that. Actually, I was reflecting on what you were asking earlier about how you leveraged diversity. I think I would like to believe that in Idea Cellular, if there's one reason why we have consistently outperformed the market, it's because we have a very stated policy of shuffling, forming and reforming teams very regularly. Every 2-3 years, so there could be people from all parts of the country working with different teams. And I think the collaborativeness and the ability to leverage different thought processes, I think that's been one of the key reasons why the company has performed so well.
Great. Thank you. I see the clock says 0000, which means we end our conversation and begin one with you.